Greetings, nerds. This is Scene and Nerd. I'm your host, Sarah Belmont, and with me, as always, is our Mr. Producer, Will Polk. How are you doing tonight, Will?
Doing very well, Sarah. How you doing this Monday evening?
I'm doing good. Question.
Yeah.
That was new intro music.
Yeah. It was one I had used before, but not with the new platform that we're using with StreamYard here. So figured I'd just mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, it threw me because I was used to the other intro music, and then when this one started and it suddenly went up a key, I was like, "What is happening? What kind of
Yeah.
party is Will throwing all of a sudden?"
Yeah. I figured, I just wanted to try something different. And I know, with the intros and see if
Episodes 5 and 6. But before we do, I have a story to tell. Heading into, I want to say Thursday or Friday, probably Thursday, I was only watching one K-drama, okay, on Netflix. Would You Marry Me? That's the title of the K-drama. And I'm caught up on episodes, so I can't binge it or everything, and it just started. So then earlier in the week, I was seeing these TikToks for some of these other K-dramas, and one in particular really caught my eye. So the next thing you know, I'm on this website called Viki, which is where you can find a lot of these dramas, and of course it's a subscription. It's an app, so you have they do a smart thing where they have episodes for free, and so you watch those, and then you're like, huh. So this other drama called Dear X, which also is apparently on HBO, but I looked at the fine print in some countries. I'm pretty sure it's not ours. So I watched both of those episodes, and then there was two more, and I was like, ugh, I need to know, so we're going to do this. So I paid for the subscription because in the back of my head, I was seeing these edits for this other drama. You see where I'm going with it. This other K-drama called, oh my God, why am I blank? Spirit Fingers. Okay, I have 3. I've collected 3, right? Then I also knew, because anticipation of this other K-drama called As You Stood By, I knew was dropping or just starting this week. But this is also a mini series. So all 8 episodes have already dropped.
Okay.
So I also started that one. So now I'm at 4, heading into Sunday, and then I watched these 2 episodes of Severance. But then I wanted to go back and watch some more episodes and get caught up on some of these shows that I've recently started. So none of these shows are also just, here's the funny thing. They are all so different that, because collecting shows, you can find like, this is becoming redundant because the same thing is going on. But like Would You Marry Me? It's a romantic comedy. That's what it is. Then you have Spirit Fingers, which is a romantic comedy, but it is also a high school drama. And I'm a little bit obsessed with the main actor in it because I just don't know what it is. And I was thinking about this. I think it's very rare to actually see someone who has genuine comedic chops. Like, not only in terms of delivering a line, but the physical comedy. I laughed out loud so many times watching this show because of the physical comedy that this guy does. There was just some looks in particular where I was like, oh my God. Now, it's also high school, and it can be very childish. I totally understand that. But for whatever reason, I really like it. I don't know why. I really like it. It works for me. Those are 2, right? On the flip side, you have Dear X, which is, how do I explain Dear X? The one thing that comes to mind is Black Widow. Not necessarily the superhero, but more about the femme fatale that you think of when you think of somebody being called a Black Widow. Now, she's younger, so she's not going after husbands, but she comes from an abusive household, and that has totally fucked her up. And then you're watching her fuck up the lives of other people, specifically men. Okay. And I will put this out there. I am not necessarily watching this for her, but they introduce it is what a step sibling. They are not related, and it's this whole thing. And I am more interested in his storyline and how he navigates this whole situation, because he's in love with her. I saw this great meme go around about this show that defines this relationship, and it's like, she's clearly a red flag, but he's colorblind. So then there's that. And then there's the last one, As I Stood By. Again, this is all very different. This is probably the most mature, and rightfully so, considering it's all about domestic abuse. And I, in more than ways than one, which when I was watching the first couple of episodes, I was kind of surprised by, so you do meet these two characters who are friends, childhood friends, and you see how one of them learns that the other is being abused by her husband. But on the flip side, you also learn about some of the family that one of the characters had, and then the legacy of that. And then it goes into a few different directions. And I'm kind of glad I'm taking that one by a bit slower than the others, just because that's heavy. That's very heavy.
Yeah, I was gonna say that does sound pretty heavy stuff to try to like take in all at once.
Yeah. And so I was looking back Sunday night, I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, wait till I tell Will how I went into, I made it pretty much majority of last week with only one K-drama. And the next thing I know, I have like collected all of these shows. Now, I am full disclosure, because I know I don't always talk about some of the things that I'm watching, specifically in the K-dramas, just because since the height of my curiosity about Korean dramas occurred a few years ago, I have noticed that I am very quick, though, to be excited about it, and then as the episodes go on, quickly be like, no, I'm done.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about that the other day, that I had not heard you talk about any K-dramas recently. So it's funny that it's funny that I was going to ask you. It's like, what's the latest in Sarah's K-drama adventures, because you haven't talked about any recently.
Well, I honestly have not been watching a lot of them. I've started a lot of them, and then the only one I really finished was Our Unknown Soul, and that was like back in June or something. And I had one earlier this year, When the Phone Rings, and I will tell you, I still haven't watched the last episode of that. I was just, sometimes what I found is K-dramas can start off really strong, and then because there's typically 16 episodes, they can go on too long, and I'm just done. And I've noticed some other things as well, but and I've also developed kind of like, ooh, if I bring up that I just started one of them on the show, what are the chances that within like the next 2 weeks I'll drop it, because I'll just be kind of over it.
Yeah,
So.
that's part of. Yeah, that's true. That's probably another reason why I just don't bring it up, because chances are that what will happen with something you bring up here. So
Right.
I'm the jinx.
Well, and I also want to I've learned my lessons about recommending or saying like something's really good when I haven't seen it all the way through.
Right.
Fair
enough. Yeah.
So, but yeah, so who knows? Out of the 4, I think at least I'll finish one of them.
Okay. Well,
no, I'm probably going to finish all of those, but who knows what'll happen in the
in due time, right?
in due time. But yeah, so that diversion brings us to Severance season 2, episode 5, Trojan's Horse. Tensions emerge after the team suffers a loss. That's the summary. Will, where do you want to start with this episode?
I went down the rabbit hole. There was a companion piece that was published called the Lexington Letters. I don't know if you've heard about this on any of the. Yeah. So I was heard about this Lexington letter, and basically it came from the showrunner, it came from Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller, and it basically tells about an employee who was employed at Lumon, who was an employee, and her name was Peg, and she underwent the severance procedure, and she was also an MDR refiner on the severed floor. And then she figured out a way to create the communications between her innie and the Outie, and an attempt to expose some of Lumen's inner workings, only to end up dead in a car accident. So so once I learned that, I was just like, ooh, I gotta I gotta figure out more about this Lexington letter. So it's like a 43-page campaign. I'm not gonna get into it all now, but there's some definite things that now that I've heard about this and some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, and also just other things, just watching the first season, definitely like adds to the mystery of it all. But that being said, as far as just getting back into the context of these two episodes, one interesting thing, especially given how episode 5 starts out with the cold open of the mysterious person wheeling the cart down the hall and whistling the Edmund Fitzgerald. Today is November 10, 2025, as we're recording this, and it's actually the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was yeah. So I was just like, huh. Okay, this is very funny that because I had just happened to see something about the anniversary coming up today when I was watching episodes over the weekend, and I was just like, oh, I got to make sure to make a note to bring that up tonight as we were watching the discussing the podcast here on the podcast about the episode. And but as far as so it was just like with that and just sort of the framing of the start of the episode as he's whistling, and we get down to we don't see who he is, so of course nothing is done in the show without intention. So we see, so I was just like, I wonder what's up with this character. And also just given, one of the things about that song in particular by Gordon Lightfoot talks about how Lake Superior never gives up her dead. It was where the ship had sank. I was thinking about all these mysteries, especially with Gemma and now with Irving, or any, as far as what is this a prescient thing that they're trying to tell us here? Or is this I'm reading too much into it? But that was sort of my initial thoughts as far as episode 5, given the context of all the things that are going on as far as the anniversary of the sinking of that ship.
I want to talk about Milchek and Miss Huang because I think in both of these episodes, and I'm not going to jump into Attila quite yet, but they stuck out the most to me because, and I say that not to say that I'm annoyed with the Helly and Mark stuff. I just found that in the other storylines, specifically with this episode, there was a lot of saying of things that as a viewer, I was kind of like, yeah, we know. And I understand how you're basically this episode, you're really watching Helly realize what occurred and which is heartbreaking, but at the same and also Mark just kind of reorienting himself with the deceit of it all, and so that I give him some credit because it was executed well, but I did find myself reaching for my phone. I was not glued to my seat in any way because it felt more like, okay, a lot of very big things happened in the previous few episodes. So this episode is trying to get these characters to almost regroup and reset in a way, which I think in terms of the characters, they completely needed that. I understand that. As a viewer, I don't know if I needed that quite because what you just brought up with the cold open, I'm like, well, can we go spend some more time in that hallway? Can we go look more over here? But and then you have, and I know how I was like, oh, we're going to start here. And now I've completely diverted. And so I'm just going to stay on this path with the Mark and the Helly of it all. It's in this episode that they have sex, right? It's the next one. See, that's the other thing about these 2 episodes that I thought stood out to me, especially when I think about last week. Last week, it felt very much like isolated chapters of a book. These 2 episodes ran together for me, where it felt very much like not even a part 1 and a part 2, but just a continuation of like all these characters, a lot of these beats, and just moving things forward to a point where it's hard for me to remember what happened in one versus the other. So
Yeah, well, I'll jump in to help you out a little bit with that, because I do agree that this was sort of a reset of it all, especially, before we even get to with the reintroduction of Helly back into the fold. We do get some answers from the prior episode, and some, speculation as far as like what, whether, for example, was that retreat that they were on, was it in the inner world, on another floor in Lumon, or was it actually like in the outside? And we see, it's been a while since we've had a situation where the Outie was given an explanation as far as like what's going on, because Mark just has there's a comment that he, when Devin asked how, how the weekend, or how the retreat went and stuff, and he's like, oh well, I just I was all wet, because I slipped off my rope. And so it was just like, so to your point about resetting things, it definitely, that was one of those devices that they used to help sort of reset everything. And then for me, once they did get into the into the back to Lumon, and just the whole discussion that Helena had with Drummond and Natalie, and them and her, again showing her disgust with the innies, and because I call them animals and all that stuff, and Natalie's like, look, we need you to go back in, and she wanted to go back in as and fake it, but because of all that what's happened, that's not an option now. She's going to have to go back through, become, have to go through, be severed employee, Helly. And so to me, those were the elements of things that worked really well for me, as far as just getting, sort of taking, moving the story forward and stuff, as far as like, okay, this has all happened, Mark's 85% done. We're just so close. And I guess that's where like the Lexington letters came in too, as far as like because with that letter, it was, also that was being done, called Lexington. And so I started thinking about Cold Harbor, and, just getting us really focused back in on like what, some of these, the any outie dynamic, and, the larger story, as far as like, what's so special about Mark, and why Mark is important. So to me, that's what really, I thought this episode did a good job of just sort of resetting some of those points.
So to go back to Milchek and Miss Huang. So in this episode, they, Dylan brings up, we want a funeral for Irving. And then later, as Milchek is trying to comply, Miss Huang says, you shouldn't let them, she raises a question. You shouldn't let them have a funeral. It makes them feel like people.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, and then he corrects her about that being a statement that was unsolicited. And then she replies, your first performance review is today, right? And that was a question. So these scenes, why they stick out to me, is mainly something that I brought up last week, because we are getting so much with the innie and outie dynamic.
Yeah.
But I don't know if enough time is really being spent on who are Milchek and Miss Huang and Natalie. Because they are, how do I put this? They are not severed,
right,
from what we can tell. I mean, we've seen Milchek at least in the outie world, and he's the same. Okay, we've seen him interact. We've also seen Natalie interact with people in the outie world, very much the same. but there is something not normal about them. Like, and I keep being fixated, like artificial intelligence is one thing that comes to mind. And I don't know what that means because or why. So it's just interesting to me that, I mean, we're talking about an episode called Trojan's Horse, where I feel like what the subtleness about those three characters throughout the seasons, it's like there's this other mystery that people, I don't know how much discussion has gone on about them because I don't look into it at all, trying to protect myself from too much spiraling and too much loose ends, and also just stumbling upon spoilers that I did not want. Mainly that.
Yeah, it's for me, that's the same. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, I do not want to get spoiled. But I from the very few things that I have looked at, I don't know how much is really paid attention. And then the other thing that always has stood out to me, specifically with our conversation last week about Milchek, is him being a minority.
Yeah.
And then you also have Natalie as but don't forget, Miss Huang is a minority as well. But there's also the fact that she's presented as a child.
Yeah.
Which adds this other weirdness, and we learn that she's on a fellowship of some sort, whatever that means. But it's just so interesting to me that those three characters, and I would hope that it was blind casting and just circumstance, but you just said it a few minutes ago, everything is done for a reason. So I wonder if they were purposely casted as minorities to fit those specific roles just because of something they are trying to say with those three characters in particular, who are clearly have quote unquote freedom of some sort because they can maneuver from the severed floor. Now I know we haven't seen Miss Huang outside of the severed floor, so let's move her aside. But
Except
those
for last week,
yeah. So anyway, so those three characters outside of the severed floor, but they are also very much controlled.
Yeah.
Very controlled.
Yeah. Well, I think to miss, and I don't want to jump ahead to the next episode because I want to go to the performance review with Milchick, because I did, especially when we saw that dynamic between the two of them with Miss Wong and Milchick as they were preparing for the funeral. But whenever we go back to first to your point, what we discussed with Natalie and Milchick and their interactions, because like last week, when Natalie presented him the paintings, she was very, very animated for Natalie. She was really, she wanted to know how he was. She smiled. This time, right before he went into the performance review, was very cold, very businesslike, and and he was asking a question, and I was like, to your, as you were bringing up about being minorities, it seemed like it was on the tip of his tongue whenever he was like asking her, how did whenever when when Seth asked Natalie, how did you feel when you received those paintings? And she just, whereas before she was very open, this week she was very like cold and businesslike and withdrawn. And and to your point about the control, I mean, I think that's part of it. They're a big open space. They're in the lobby, and that was one aspect of it. Go ahead. Yeah.
I didn't view her as any different between those two scenes.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
I did notice when he raised the question, her reaction.
Yeah.
There was almost like you were saying, it was on the tip of his tongue. Well, I think a tear was on the tip of her eyeball. So, but there's something about the way Natalie, or the performance, that the actress is doing a phenomenal job. It's just that it feels like she's tethered in some way to that intercom with the board. Where that's why Milchek couldn't really say exactly what he wanted to and ask that question out loud, and because she is also trying to tell him, like, they're gonna hear it. or something like, you can't say it and I can't say what I'm thinking, so I'm just going to smile, but it's going to be more of a sad smile. So that was the difference of performance that I noticed. Overall, I thought it was in both ways. It very much feels like, and arguably she's more tethered than Milchek is. And that's what we kind of learn with the performance review.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think the performance review too, I think it like, yeah, I did think about, the things that they pointed out. They used too many big words, and then,
We have to
the
talk about that.
yeah,
That because I'm so glad you started with that. Personally,
yeah.
I wanted to talk about the paper clips, but
Oh,
still,
yeah. Oh, I'm
the
gonna get to the paper clips too. Yeah,
the use of big words, which it's a sign of a good show, because he says that line to Miss Huang about childish things, and I wrote it down, and I was even thinking, I was like, oh my God, this man, he must be looking at his dictionary and thesaurus all the time. Like, he is so well read. And then they bring it up, and it's such a microaggression too, on
yeah.
top of that.
Mm,
Like it's so, but what really got me was the when he went to the mirror and said the line and then quickly adjusted, because it felt like, and I never finished this show. I only remember watching like the first 1 or 2 seasons of it, but Westworld. It felt like a robot towards the end, especially with their repetition of grow, grow, grow. A robot that was malfunctioning. And it was and it's almost also, to an extent, felt like it was a scene from a horror movie.
yeah, yeah. Definitely. I completely agree. I'll expand on it a little bit more when we get to episode 6. But but thinking about this, the performance review itself, because there was just, the microaggressions that were there with, and then the other thing with, that confidence that he had going in, and I don't know if it was confidence, but the thing about Milchick, he took Harmony's place, and I think the third element of what they were talking about with the review, especially when they raised the point, like, you are here to accomplish this great thing with the Cold Harbor. I think it seems like it's the cult of Lumon, and the cult of Kier in particular. When it's just it just permeates around this whole thing. I mean, even thinking back to, like, you see it there with the performance review, you see it also there with the discussion between Helena and Drummond at the beginning there, whenever they told her she had to go back, and it's like, father wants this, and so Drummond says that to Helena, and when he says it, is it the father meaning like father in the sense of like biological father, or father in the father of this, the cult of personality that is built
Here,
up around, yeah.
here.
Yeah, here, yeah. Excuse me.
I think with her, it's her father.
Yeah, but let me finish where I was going with that was, but whenever he also says father, so I was just thinking the other point is, well, maybe they're siblings, but I mean, it could be interpreted either way.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But okay, so
so we got to talk about Irving and the whole funeral weirdness of with Dylan and the discovery.
I know.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well,
I just the paper
yeah,
clips. You wanted
yeah.
to talk about the paper clips.
Oh no, I
So,
was just. I mean,
well, we're
no.
this beat.
No, no. It was just again, just again, another microaggression, and just a weird thing that they brought up. I had another thought, but I've lost it, so we can move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Talk about the note.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I
Well,
thought
just no. I was going to say, well, I mean, just the whole framing of. I mean, I guess to pick up Milchick and Miss Wong, as far as just the whole conversation about not being nice to them, and that was the other thing too, I guess, with the performance review, because it was I came out of it, he's like, okay, I got to start pulling it in and stuff, and it'd be more tougher with these folks, even to the point where he, like, Milchick shut it down whenever she was going to try to sing her song, which I'm glad he did, but it was just the weirdness. I guess the thing with that scene in particular that just stood out to me was just like the weirdness of the head of Irving with the Malaysian black melon. And I guess the whole like metaphor of just like the company just eating you, literally. I guess it just like worked with me on several creepy levels. Like,
That is creepy. My mind did not go there at all, but that is pretty creepy. So what about the note?
oh, I mean, just basically Irving like put it together what to hang in there with when Dylan put it together that what Irving was trying to tell him, and at least leads to the directions to the export floor.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I mean, it was a picture on the front side, and then on the back side, it had all the things. So yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think Dylan put it back?
I think because he doesn't want to. At the end of the day, Dylan doesn't want to lose his privileges. He doesn't want to lose, because I think that's one element of it. I think, because I think he's really enjoy, from what he's learned that we learned from Gretchen as far in the life that his Audi has. And any Dylan is very, very happy and content with what he's got going on with Gretchen with the visitation floor.
That has turned into conjugal visits.
Yeah. So I don't think he wants to put that at risk. So, if you going back to the first season, if you like have any like kind of contraband or stuff on the separate floor that may be construed as an attempt to reach out to the Outties, punishment will happen. So I think that's where that's coming from. What about you?
So the conjugal visit.
Well, yeah. You want to switch over to episode 6 now?
Oh, we've already switched over.
But officially, do we want to? I mean, anything else about episode 5 before we look at?
Oh, I'm sure we'll go back to episode 5, yeah. But like, so with Dylan and Gretchen, they escalated very quickly from a kiss to it's implied. Now, is it implied that they had sex or just make out? I think they made out. Okay.
Oh, okay. Actually, now that I think about it, I think they had sex. Yeah,
because the editing was on point with the mismatch between them and Mark and Helly, who we know had sex.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Which all this really leads me to think about and question is, okay, so what are the chances that Helly is pregnant?
Oh, twice now? Very. Especially the comment later in the episode.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, like, of course, that would be good storytelling because he also had sex with Helena. And then, if they do make her pregnant, then the question is like that mom responsibility, which leads to this whole other dynamic that we have not touched on at all. Like in terms of, I mean, you already have Helly talk about the fact like this woman used my body to spy on my friends and like dress me and present me and like I'm a puppet.
Yep.
And you raised something about Helena that I don't know why I always defend the bad characters, but because you talked about like her comment, fucking animals. Mm-hmm. You have to keep in mind, if I was Helena, I would probably feel the same way about the innies, considering my innie tried to kill herself. IE tried to kill me in there. And then also they just tried to kill me. Yeah. so I think it's warranted.
Oh yeah. It's very fair. Very fair.
Yeah. But it's also very layered because on top of that, there's also, well, Mark's an innie. The Mark that you had sex with willingly is an innie, and you knew that going down there. And so and then it walking into this random Chinese place and having a conversation, which I did like that scene.
I did too.
You didn't?
I did like it.
Yeah. I liked it because there was a lot more subtleness into things that were not said and what was said versus what was said. Both of these characters are so multi-layer that it's like, and by multi-layered, I guess maybe that's the wrong articulation, because with this show and these characters, it's actually, oh my God, I just lost my thought. It's actually more of a sense of the motivational differences or the contradicting motivations at play with these characters. That's what's really fascinating, because you have the interest in love and connection, but you also have the interest in, I am a person as an innie, I am a person as an outie, and then you have these, like, all of this other shit. I mean, with Helena and her father, and Mark with his wife, his dead wife or alive wife, who knows
Yeah.
where she is.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. With that, because, I think thinking back to the 5th episode with when Milchek confronted Mark with, you fucked her, and that, and then it's like all these, like, to your point about motivations and stuff, because the reason why a lot of these folks have, I mean, we've seen it. I mean, the motivations for the outie to, like, even go through the severed procedure is because they're trying to escape some kind of pain. Mark with his wife, Dylan, because he's always looking for something, but he's just, he comes short.
Well, it's how he got a job.
Yeah. The feeling, I guess, the feelings of inadequacy, and because he's just and other things like that. And then Irving. I mean, it seems multi-layered with Irving at this point, but I think part of it is, I think he's on to something, as far as, like, whenever Drummond breaks into his apartment and, like, finds the list of names and he sees Bert.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When was Mark severed? Was it before or after the death of Gemma?
After the death of Gemma.
And we know that for sure.
Yeah, because remember, he had the conversation with his sister about the grief and the loss and stuff. So that it was.
Well, you watched the first season more recently than I did, so so that's why I just ask and want to make sure that, like, that is a known thing and not something we've told ourselves.
No, it's a known thing. It's a known thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that scene where Milchek was, because he was told during his performance review, like, it's time to go back to the basics, to remember these severed employees, their true purpose, and treat them as they really are. And then that leads to Seth basically calling Mark out, and which is kind of also a human way to treat Mark, and be like, you're being a complete asshole right now. You need to tell that woman that you slept with her, and i.e. just realized, like, the her was not the her.
Yeah.
So you got to do that. But my question, and what I want to explore about that scene and talk a little bit more about Milchek, is, so he goes from the performance review, all of the microaggressions that we talked about, all of the, and remember, like, here's your carrot, you're going to be a part of the success. You have to, like, treat these on humans. So I guess my overall question is, why do you think he, in particular, Milchek, has kind of subtly been leading this reform on the severed floor?
So, and this is where I think I'm glad I went down the. Well, I'm just gonna get the theory spiral here, and it's just, like, fresh because and it's fresh because this is where I'm glad I did find that Lexington letter. So the Lexington letter, it was whenever when the Peggy was sharing this, she shared the letters with the reporter, with the Topeka Star, I think was the name of the paper. And the emails is always Jim M, as far as who was the editor. And we learned in that letter that the Jim M is Jim Milchick. So I don't know if it's a coincidence that, this person who is, they're sharing information about the severed floor and things that are happening there in Lumon, and Seth Milchick have, they have the same surname. Is it coincidence? Maybe. If not, but just given how Milchick has been, like, treating these folks, is he going to, like, help lead the revolution? Especially whenever we didn't talk about, we touched on a little bit with the book with Devin's husband writing he's writing a novel with Natalie, and stuff. But but he, like, Harry, he was going to bring things down, but now he's really getting into, Devin calls him out because he's just like parroting the company line, whereas before he was like very revolutionary. I'm
Yeah,
wondering
you're
if
talking about Rickon. Yeah.
yeah. Now I'm wondering, like, okay, is Milchick like possibly, sleeper agent in there too, just trying to like, expose these things? Because like you said, I mean, what we know is, as far as we know, he's not a severed person. So, and
It's almost like I want to say he's not severed.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, like there is something, because I don't know if he's human either.
Yeah. Well,
There is something, and I mean, from what I vaguely recall, and you can correct me if I'm way off point with this, but his presence in season 1, he also wasn't. He's definitely a company man,
yeah.
but like he does clearly have, whether it be an affection for the MD department, or for Innies as a whole, has yet to be seen.
Right.
But I wonder, because my lack of knowledge about the information that you just shared, but my mind goes to, well, what's the difference between him and Cobell? Because with Cobell, there is much more of an obsession with Mark. We know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a fixation, and some very strange fixation there. But there's also, are they kind of, how do I put this? Are they kind of also showing with the different supervisors we've seen now? We've had experience with 2, and now even Miss Huang. And it'll be interesting to see where her character goes with this affection towards Innies. The more time you spend on the severed floor, the more your own reality also warps. Like, because you're in the office with them for X amount of hours of a day. So to like, at what point it's like, oh, that they're meant for this. Like, they're not your normal coworker.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a couple things. I mean, I think getting back, thinking about the performance review, I'm glad you brought up the affection from the first season, because he was. I mean, they had. I remember watching, like, they had a celebration party and a dance and all that kind of stuff, and it was a more affectionate treatment of the, like you with these 4 Innies. I mean, and like you said, it could extend to all Innies, but in particular these 4. Because even whenever, because even like the beginning of this season, when they brought in the other group, Seth really, in some ways advocated for. He didn't push back whenever Mark made the demand.
Oh no, he definitely was just like, yeah, they're replaceable.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And whereas Harmony would have pushed back, and we saw, so I think it's, he was softer towards them, and I think, especially so whenever he tells Miss Wong that he's going to have to pull the reins in, and then, and he also, like, asserts himself, because he figures out that she was the one on the floor who basically, like, let the board know and what's going on as far as being a floor spy.
oh yeah, there's another Trojan horse. It's
Yep.
just like with his interactions with Natalie.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
Seth never has an interaction that isn't going to be scrutinized by management.
Yeah. So I say all that to like, it really does bring into question a lot of what are his motivations, and and then, as you brought up earlier about him, with the grow, and that scene where he's re-educating himself, and now I can bring up the paperclips. While I was thinking about just the meticulous level, to the point where his hands were like shaking because of trying to get the corrective action. It was just gut wrenching for me watching that, as far as just seeing how, getting into some of the larger things as far as company and
Perfection.
perfection. Yeah. Yeah. It just really, there's just so many levels to that. And then as far as like you said earlier in the episode tonight, grow. I mean, it was just, yeah. I mean, that was, to me, and I know we'll talk about here, we'll get here in a moment, Bert and Irving's dinner, were the things that really stood out. And also, too, when Helly had that moment on the hall after she learned that she and Mark, well, Helena and Mark had sex, and really gets to, and she lost that moment and
Yeah.
wanted to have that moment. Those were the things that really stood out to me in these episodes.
Yeah. I liked how she put that. Like, I want my moment. And well, she didn't realize it, but her moment was also on a ticking time bomb, considering throughout these 2 episodes. I kind of laugh because the way we were talking about it last week, we thought reintegration would be instant. No, time process. So we have yet to fully see or meet reintegrated Mark, whatever that means. But we definitely are seeing the physical manifestations that are very concerning, very zombie-like, very undead-like behavior with the hunger and the bleeding. And also just, I mean, which makes sense considering the medical procedure that we witnessed. And I'm just thinking the whole time, that's not sanitary at all. Like, get some kind of weird infection, like, Jesus Christ. What we doing here?
That too. Yeah. But also
But
to think, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna. You should probably finish your thought because I was gonna go to a whole different point. But yeah.
Oh yeah. Just I was going to just talk about the reintegration and just the coughing throughout. And I remember the sickliness that PD had in the first season, and we're seeing that reintegration, coming through with Mark, and then also the weird. I know I don't know if you've watched the opening credits, and I brought it up a few episodes ago, but just seeing, for me, it's like now having some of the payoffs of some of the things that are in that opening credits, like the weird, funky egg drop soup looking concoction that Mark's drinking. I don't know what it is, but it's pretty gross. And the pills that he's taking, as far as just, as with the integration, and then also with the funeral earlier. I mean, that was the other thing I was going to bring up with the mugs. Seeing the payoff with the mug in the opening credit, and then we get it with the funeral there whenever they were having a funeral for Irving or B. But yeah, I mean the reintegration piece is as they get close, as you said, it's not an instantaneous thing, and really learning what Gabi's motivations, because she's not doing this. She has a motivation for trying to make sure that this is successful, given that she was one of those she was a doctor who used to perform these several procedures. She does have a vested interest in trying to make sure that this reintegration happens very successfully, and warning Mark too, just like, don't rush it, because we see what the result of that is at the end of this episode with him having that seizure. So yeah, I mean, it's just a lot through those moments throughout the episode.
All right. So now you can finally talk about Irving and Bert.
Oh yeah, that dinner was just so level. So many layers. We definitely get the we get to the heart of it. Is just the question of do any's have a soul, and just how Bert and Fields, Fields had a little bit too much to drink there, and just said a little bit too much. I did like did like how they got into the philosophical discussion, as far as it was Jesus who led Bert to do it, because he was like, well, I'm a scoundrel, but on the outside, but my get to heaven.
See that was fascinating to me about that whole conversation. Not that does Ennis have a whole soul or not, but more about the obvious. We're not telling you the real reason why, Bert. We're going to insinuate something that kind of the implications are he in some way did something that would mean that he would go to hell. And what is that? And why is that? Because what I also thought was very interesting is they were clearly together before severed employees.
Yeah.
Yet only Bert needed to get severed. So like that kind of why this character came to be a severed employee is very fascinating when his spouse didn't. Yet and it's not a gay thing because they're both gay. I don't know if we realize that. They're both
all three of them are. Yeah.
Yeah, all three of them are. So it's not that.
Yeah.
But it's so I don't know, or maybe the context was actually more about how about himself coming out of the closet and him maybe having a very religious family, and so maybe it's just they kind of explain it. So I can appreciate how we got a lot of information, but there are some questions still remaining, while at the same time just seeing Irving kind of as an outie experiencing this tangled web of Huns that we so far have only really explored on the severed floor. So now this is our first time really in the outer world exploring those dynamics and the awkwardness and the implications of like, you two, like, I like how he just comes out and said, you two clearly had unprotected sex. And that's where my mind was immediately like, yeah, Helly's going to be pregnant. Here. There is no protection on the severed floor. Helly's going to be pregnant. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I was like, well, see, I even thought that last week when they were in the tent, because I was like,
yeah, I didn't. I did not think about that at all. Did not cross my mind.
Like, they're out in the wild, so let's see pull it out.
Yeah. But I think that's what the show needs. It needs a knocked up person out of wedlock. Okay, that's exactly what you need. While the other person's trying to find his undead wife. Okay.
Yeah.
Emphasis on that. Like, it's funny how you go through. We're talking about an Irving Bert dynamic with Irving meeting Bert's husband and having that a 3-person dinner like that to the conjugal visit between Gretchen and Dylan to Mark and Helena and Mark and Helly and then Mark and Helena even meet up at some point. They don't have sex, but it was just all foreplay. So
because it was definitely, I think that was the thing too with the with I meant to say earlier about the fact that the severed people are trying to escape pain, but even Mark and Helena, Outie Mark, let me be very clear, and Outie and Helena had they had sparks. I mean, there was definitely a flirtation thing there until things went sideways when Helena.
And you know why that is, right?
Oh yeah.
Because it's not 2 different personalities.
Exactly.
It's the same personality, and the attraction that does not get severed. So if you're attracted to someone on the severed floor, you meet them in real life, you're still going to be attracted to you're still going to be drawn to them in some way. You don't know what is fascinating though is because of the severed nature of the relationship, you don't know the full history. So you're also missing, like as Helly put it, a memory, or a memory is taken from you. And I can appreciate how they parallel that very clearly between Bert and Irving meeting up, and then also Helena and Mark meeting up, and this we're in the outer world, and I know that that there was something, but I don't know what it is. But I like you, but you're also evil. I'm talking about Helena. So there's just a lot of melodrama happening with that, but I can appreciate how at some point it feels a bit redundant. It's like, well, you're already exploring that with these 2 characters. Why do you have to see it? But the nuanced differences between each of those relationships allow it not to feel redundant to me.
Exactly.
And and it's just you're just looking at a different side of the cube. It's just a different perspective and a different relationship that has different motivations and different attachments. I mean, you got Dylan with the kids outside, like a family man. And then you got Mark with a dead wife in the outer world. And then you got Bert with a alive husband.
A live husband who I was joking earlier, said a little bit too much because, they were getting to he was sharing stories about things that happened before Severance, the Severed floor even happened. So,
Right.
which, yeah. And, I think about that, especially, so how, so, because, we saw Bert like looking at spying on Irving whenever Irving was calling whoever that mysterious person he's talking to in the phone booth. So it's just like, so, to your point, you have all these relationships, but on top of that, you have these things that are happening where all, where you do, you have Mark trying to get reintegrated to like learn about, to bring light on this floor. You have Devin and Ricker before he like got the cash, before he got blinded by the cash, trying to like expose all the Severed stuff. And so, I mean, it's just so many levels to this show. To your point, that like you said, that to your point that yeah, you do have all these like love triangles and quadruples and thruples, but there's so many other things in there that you don't get like it can become redundant, but then they have like these other things, like even like with Drummond, like having frolic on tattooed on his finger, and then thinking that I thought back, and pulling that back to our discussion earlier about is he an Ingan? So, given that they have all the what's it, the four themes or whatever, I always like forget what they call them, but the four, it's like frolic, woe, blah, the other two. So yeah, I mean, it's just so many levels with this show that, I mean, you can just, we can really like even dig even deeper if we wanted to. And we have what, 4 episodes left? Yeah.
Yeah, we're just over halfway through, done with this season. A lot more to talk about. And on that note, Will, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me on all the socials at Will M. Polk, WILLMPOLK.
And you can find me there too at SJ Belmont, SJBLMONT. Please follow our crew on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Blue Sky. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and threads at scene_N_nerd. And visit our website, www.podcast.com. But most importantly, rate, follow, and comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Good night, Geek Out. You're welcome.